in principle? Okay. So now his opinions are based on extensive background in governance, and I would request our guest of honor, Shri Sanjeev Chopra, to please address the gathering. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mehdi. You see, technology has very interesting insights. It can always rake up things that were in the past and things, but it's a pleasure, to cut a long story short. Mr. Jaipuria, Mr. N.K. Gupta, my very dear friend, Mr. S.K. Mahapatra, whom we are meeting after a very long time. I'm glad that you called me here. Thank you, sir. Mr. Vinod Malhotra, my NMP batchmates. I can see Anil Jain, Gangal and Kalol here. My dear friend T.K. Arun, who was with me both in JNU and then in Economic Times. Mr. Parthakar is here. He is helping the government of West Bengal in developing a brand called the Bis for Bangla. The very smartly turned out young men and women who are doing their graduate/postgraduate course at the Jaipuria Institute. Their enthusiasm, their verve, and the very positive smiles which I got in the morning are a good reflection of the fact that things are all well and proper. Well, you can always clap for yourself, so that's, that's very good. Okay, now friends, we're going to be talking about some very important themes today. And these are themes which are listed out. Themes are on change, they are on global economy, they are on managements, and that's on social responsibility, that's on sustainability. Therefore, it's very important that we keep certain things in mind. We look at things in a slightly larger perspective. And one of the things which those of us on the stage here realize is that this is one of those occasions where at least all of us present in the room were born in the previous century. That is, all of us were born before the 21st century. Therefore, there is a bond that we have. In the next 5 or 10 years, people like me and Mahapatra and Kolon and Anil Jain will be asked to speak to people, many of whom would have been born in this century, and therefore there would be a millennial divide amongst us and them. So fortunately, we are all talking to each other, and all of us were born somewhere in the 1900s, hopefully. I don't see the possibility of anybody who was born in 2000, in this millennia to be here. But having said that, I just thought, that let's look at how life would have been 1,000 years ago. How the world would have been 1,000 years ago, how the world would have been 100 years ago, and how the world was 10 years ago. Because one of the themes that you have is change, right? So the world has changed in 1,000 years, the world has changed in the last 100 years, and the world has changed in the last 10 years, right? Now, important from the view of perspectives of history is to look at how the world was 1,000 years ago. And can we think of what the world was 1,000 years ago? The USA had not been discovered, Americas were not known, Australia was not known. Of course, forget about Arctic or the Antarctic. These were not known at all. And at that point of time, believe it or not, the center of the world was in Constantinople. Islam was a young, vibrant, progressive religion. Christianity was very, very medieval, more feudal, more regressive than anything that we've seen till now. India was evolving. India did not have any of the things that we talk about now. You see, and for most people, life was nasty, brutal, and short. 1,000 years ago, slave trade was a driver of the economy. Slave trade was a legitimate driver of the economy. So, it's very important to have things in perspective when we talk about global change, when we talk about change, to realize that what is unacceptable at a certain point of time, in a certain period of history, becomes unacceptable, it gets overtaken, and then new things come over. Of course, in the morning, our Honorable Minister Suresh Prabhu talked about technology, and also talked to you about how there are great advantages of technology and how there are limitations to these technology. And we got to realize that what is it that can be done by technology and what is it that you cannot do by technology. There's something which Facebook can do, but there are many things which Facebook cannot do. So it's very important to have things in perspective. Now, that was 1,000 years ago. You can imagine the map of the world 1,000 years ago. You look at 100 years ago. What was happening 100 years ago? The world was fighting, the World War I, which is sometimes called the Great War. I don't know why it is called the Great War. I mean, it was great only in terms of its size. So it again shows how we ascribe,